Welcome. It's the Matt Singer Podcast, Wednesday, March 13th of 2019. New comic book day. Whole bunch of new comics out that I'm very excited to read. First, though, got a couple of email questions to answer. I always love this, by the way. So please do get in touch with me anytime with any sorts of questions. I love any kind of interactivity on this show. You can email me, matt@mattsager.com. That's quick and easy. As is calling me and leaving me a voicemail at 646-535-4788. I've also got lots of other ways you can get in touch with me via social media and other platforms, and I'll give all that info out at the end of tonight's podcast episode. So one question I got asked a lot, which is always interesting when I sort of feel like I'll occasionally do something like last night where there's a major story, one that's a little bit out of my wheelhouse, where I just know the facts and feel I've got to comment. And then before you know it, I've done an entire segment while acknowledging that my knowledge is quite limited. I give out as much of the story as possible. And in so doing, I guess I've gotten a little bit of credibility because I was asked this many times today via email, as well as on Twitter and over Facebook. Why, if these two actresses, Felicity Huffman and Lori Loughlin, given that they were arrested, and in the case of Lori Loughlin, her husband's going down too, what about Felicity's husband, the great William H. Macy, who you might have seen Sunday on a very special, really special, not a very special episode, a very special episode of Shameless, which it really was, because for one thing, it had the highest ratings of any episode this season. But really it was special because I don't know how the show's going to survive after this, but spoilers, if you haven't been following the news about Emmy Rossum and Shameless, spoiler that has probably been spoiled already, but it was the final episode featuring Emmy Rossum. Fiona Gallagher has left the building. Now, that cast is full of super talented people, but you know, maybe it's the role she played that really reinforced this, or maybe it made it true. Maybe it surpassed her character and became a real fact about the storytelling, the script, etc. But what it feels like to me, and I say this in spite of a cast of just all brilliant people. I mean, it's just, there's no shortage of talent, but it does feel as though they all revolved in some way, and the story in particular revolved around and was seen through the lens primarily of Fiona Gallagher. So I don't know how Shameless is going to play out going forward without Fiona. But I was asked if I'd seen it and how I felt about it, and I feel very sad. I did see it. But the question I was asked even more today was, why wasn't William H. Macy named in this suit? Why isn't he in handcuffs? Why isn't he posting $250,000 in bail? And fortunately, I have an answer. Not one based on any kind of expertise, because let me make this very clear if it's not. I don't know how this is playing out. I don't know how the laws involved work, and I don't know the details of the case. Other than that, it's huge, and that is now being casually referred to in even the most cursory article about it as the biggest college admissions scam in history, which may well prove to be true, although I think one thing that's going to come out of this case is a ton of stuff that people end up going to prison for or being charged for are going to be only slightly exaggerated versions of how many of these schools and the people who finance them and then send their children to those schools, how they operate. Some of this is obviously gross criminal malfeasance, and I'm not in any way trying to imply that that's how college works in this country. But there are certain ways in which you can donate to a charitable cause, and it does wind up. I mean, look, do you think George W. Bush needed to go to Yale? That he was a genius? No, not an insult, just saying. I'm sure he himself would gladly admit it. Well, not gladly, but he'd certainly admit it. So fortunately, a ton of websites ask the same question. How is it that William H. Macy is escaping this monumental set of consequences that is affecting his wife, actor Lori Loughlin, and her husband? And then, of course, there's 48 or so other people who are simply not being referred to in the news yet. I suspect for one reason, they want to be careful about letting too many details leak. They want to be careful to not besmirch anyone who may or may not actually be guilty. But really what happened, I believe, is that when the celebrities got involved, that was when all the websites threw out their rules of, let's ask a lot of questions first, and instead said, wow, look at all these big names flaming out publicly in a big legal dispute. Let's cover it to the best of our ability. That combined with the fact that many of the others accused, some of them are university staffers who there's going to be an investigation, possibly charges filed, and undoubtedly lots of dismissals. And the more that people give information about that, the more difficult that makes the process. Also, a lot of people involved on the parental side. Listen to last night's episode, by the way, if you're not sure what I'm talking about, or just Google college scandal. There is a massive, the word really is conspiracy, where about 50 people have been using bribery and various forms of fraud to get their kids accepted into schools in which they otherwise don't belong. And among these people are Felicity Huffman and Lori Loughlin and her husband. It's an interesting question for not the least of reasons being that Macy is actually named in the criminal complaint. You know, the guy who was actually the ringleader behind all this, William, quote, Rick, end quote, Singer. You know, it's never a good idea to go into business with someone whose nickname is just another person's name, so that if they have to, they can go, oh yeah, I'm Rick. You're looking for William. I'm a totally different guy. Like if he was William Bill or Billy or even Skippy, anything other than just some rando other name behind which you can hide if things get hot, which boy are they ever hot for Mr. Singer. But Singer is widely believed to be the guy referenced in all these legal documents as cooperating witness 1 or CW1. And he mentions Macy. He says that he advised Huffman and, quote, her spouse, end quote, that he controlled a testing center and could arrange for a third party to purport to proctor their daughter's SAT and secretly correct her answers after the fact. You know, criminality aside and the abuses of our education aside, what a shitty thing to do to your kid, to make them unknowing accomplices in your drive to propel them into your vision of success for them. That is really lame. Not saying the kids are blameless, but many of them are. A lot of the kids, for instance, don't appear to know that the SATs and ACT tests they took, in many instances, they finished them, handed them off to the proctor or professor or whatever, and the guy just threw it in the recycling bin and had a pre-filled out 80 to 95% accurate SAT at the ready, and he would just copy the student's signature. It was a very scummy set of actions. So CW1, cooperating witness 1, or William Rick Singer, first off advised investigators that Huffman and her spouse agreed to the plan. He then references a very specific phone call with both Macy and Huffman on the line from December 12th of 2018. And they were talking about one of Singer's more prevalent scams, one in which, for various reasons, the student is allowed 2 days to take an SAT, which, oh boy, the scumbaggery is just abounding here. But Macy took issue with it and asked, do we want 2 days? It's not clear whether he was asking that in protest of, hey, this sounds kind of fishy, or maybe it was one of the many options being offered. Like for $15,000, I'll take the test myself and plant her name on it. For $30,000, she gets 2 days. So according to Singer, Macy says about the 2-day testing process for his daughter, quote, she'll score higher. Just her base score will be higher if we did it over 2 days. Well, yeah, that's why people are not allowed to take it over 2 days. Jesus Jones. So Vulture, who wanted to get to the bottom of this, why William H. Macy isn't culpable somehow, asked the U.S. Attorney's Office in Massachusetts as to why, out of all these people, William H. Macy seems uniquely unscathed, given that he did seem to at least be a bit involved. But the U.S. Attorney's Office had no comment. I wouldn't expect that they would. A case this early, you can only mess things up for yourself by spilling any facts, other than the stuff that anyone could easily verify by themselves. Who was arrested, what they were arrested for. Beyond that, what the case holds, who's being charged with what. You keep that under lock and key. You don't want to taint your case. That said, Vulture nonetheless reached out to lawyers and other people who they thought might be able to help them understand what's going on here. And they spoke with an NYU law professor named Rebecca Roiphe, who said, quote, there are a couple of different possibilities. One of the possibilities being that the husband is far less culpable. That's actually what I think is going on. However, she goes on to say, quote, maybe it's possible that the government has far more evidence than it's laid out here, and in this evidence, that Huffman played a far more significant role than her husband. Now, yet another question might be why Macy isn't even mentioned by name in these documents, other than as the husband when referring to Felicity Huffman. And theories abound on this, too. Vulture spoke with a criminal attorney, one Murray Richmond, who said, quote, if there's no active participation in the wrongdoing, the spouse will not be charged. Mere knowledge, even with the presence, does not constitute criminal conduct. Now, I get that, but at the same time, that phone call sounds like he's advocating for a 2-day testing process, which is part of the Rick Singer package of bogus ways to get into college for your kids. So here what Richmond says I think is more applicable. Quote, or if there's insufficient evidence to necessarily link that spouse to criminal activity, they won't be charged if it's mere allegations. They spoke with some other legal experts who said, well, don't assume that Macy's out of danger, just because he hasn't been charged yet. All that necessarily means is there isn't either a ton of evidence or he's cooperating so much that he's given up the dirt on his wife, which seems less likely. They could be using him to get as much information as possible, trying to make him feel safe because he's not facing jail time or arrest charges. Although, if he admits too much, or if he lies or withholds information, he could very quickly find himself being charged. And that's my guess, that his status is sort of undetermined at this point. That said, it does seem a far cry from Lori Loughlin landing in Los Angeles from a trip out of country and immediately being arrested. Or Felicity Huffman, for that matter, being raided at gunpoint by the FBI. I understand that that's how they do things. I approve and everything. But Macy is enjoying a relatively peaceful time of it. So my answer is simply Google it. That's what I did. And I found out many possible reasons as to why Macy may avoid charges or may simply be avoiding them in the short term. But mostly I find this entire thing very sad. Deeply sad for the kids involved, although many of them have revealed themselves as gigantic assholes. They're making billions of dollars as on-campus influencers and posting pictures of themselves doing the sports that they were accepted into their universities based on their skills, and posting to Instagram, ha ha ha, LOL, look at me trying to row my boat. I got accepted on a boating scholarship. How does that even happen? Plus, I can't boat. Hashtag, my parents are criminals and I'm loving it. It's certainly not the case that the kids are universally innocent, but many of them, I believe, are. And it's conceivable that some of that information might be what they hope to extract from William H. Macy. It does strike me very odd that he is emerging so unscathed at this moment in time when the colleges and many participants in this crime scheme are going down quite hard and quite publicly. Meanwhile, Rob Lowe's son speaks for us all. He took to Twitter today to say, quote, I studied for months for the SAT, twice, sometimes 3 times a week, tons of practice tests. Yeah, the SAT is no joke. Ended up taking the SAT multiple times as well. College apps were no joke. The amount of stress kids put into that to potentially lose a spot to someone unfairly is horrible. And let me say, I'm incredibly grateful that I had the privilege and opportunity to have a tutor and to afford practice test programs. A lot of kids don't. Yeah, you know, there are ways to have money and to use it to genuinely give your kids a leg up in the form of helping them learn, giving them tutelage, practice tests. So John Owen Lowe goes on to say, a lot of kids don't have these opportunities, and to think of them losing their chance at their dream school to someone undeserving is really, really gross. Now, he didn't name any names, nor did he have to, but I will say he is my spirit animal today, channeling exactly what I think. This whole thing is disgusting and despicable, and is going to, for reasons both fair and unfair, really contribute, I believe, to America's ongoing culture of know-nothingness and distrust in institutions that have forever been the sort of bastion of truth and knowledge and education. So they've already dismantled the press for all practical purposes. People just take very little stock, shockingly little stock, in what newspapers and news networks have to say. Now it's college. When the Democrats have their debate and they're a million times more eloquent than, say, Donald Trump, he can say, well, they come from the crooked universities, crooked colleges. I'm very conscious right now of how many points, to the extent I've got a side, that my side is giving away. We're eating each other. We're attacking every presidential candidate. We're going on TV and saying we're definitely not going to impeach Trump no matter what crimes he's committed. I don't know what's going on with Democrats. Some good news today. I've spoken on the podcast a couple times about Bryan Singer, who has had allegations against him for years of unbecoming conduct on film sets, harassing male actors and especially harassing kids, harassing them in particular on the set of Apt Pupil in a way that he should have never been hired again. He's dangerous. And in the wake of all this, you know, he's still getting hired. Bohemian Rhapsody hated working with him so much that with just 3 weeks of shooting left to go, they fired Singer. Very interesting, a very dramatic and radical move, and one that definitely has more to the story than, oh, we just decided to fire our director. Something went down. When we find out what that is, that may be very illuminating in figuring out what exactly Bryan Singer does that makes him so very toxic. Other than the obvious, the stuff about Apt Pupil, just go to the Atlantic, go to their website, or Google Atlantic and this quote from Singer, nobody is going to believe you. That is both a quote from Singer to a child and the headline in an article going into some depth about the horrific behavior he's been demonstrating for years. It's from their March 2019 issue. And like Leaving Neverland, just as that show was difficult to watch, this article's difficult to read, but very important. And I was astonished, first off, that Bryan Singer was working at all, given what is publicly known about him. But that in the aftermath of these new investigations, that he'd still be working as the director of Red Sonja. So buried in the news today, you really have to look deep into this article to get to the good news. But The Hollywood Reporter today ran a story on their website about an actress named Charlotte Kirk, who is at the center of a rather convoluted scandal having to do with the CEO of Warner Brothers, the head of Millennium, Avi Lerner, another guy with a terrible track record of bad behavior on set, Brett Ratner, and all of these men pushing to get her film roles because they had apparently, seemingly, some of them at least, implied that if she were to perform various favors for them, social, sexual favors, they'd work overtime to get her cast in all kinds of movies, which is so disgusting and depressing on so many levels. But buried in this article that's full of detail, full of unpleasantness, there is some good news. Now, keep in mind that since the Atlantic article came out, it's been weeks, and there's been no news about Bryan Singer being asked to leave or told to leave or stepping down from being director of Red Sonja, which he really, really should have. He should be blacklisted until there's an investigation. If there's an investigation and all of these reports are proven false, false? Bryan Singer deserves justice, a clean record, and to work again. But that investigation has to happen. Studios refusing to do that is a tacit acceptance of his behavior and any harm that it causes. So the good news I'm talking about, way deep into this article, they're talking about the aforementioned Avi Lerner, saying, quote, Lerner made news recently when he hired Bryan Singer, yeah, this guy's a class act, to direct a reboot of Red Sonja. After Singer was accused in an Atlantic magazine article of sexually assaulting underage boys, Lerner dismissed the story as, quote, agenda-driven fake news. God, do I hate these buzzwords that people use to get out of every crime and scummy thing that they do. However, he then walked the statement back, and eventually he dropped Singer from the project because he was unable to secure a domestic distributor. Boom. That's right. At some point between that article's being released, this head of Millennium saying, it's all a big fake news nonsense. And today, at some point, somebody made a wise decision, and I don't know why they didn't go right to the news and say, listen, we finally did the right thing. We got rid of that piece of garbage Bryan Singer. But they did. Red Sonja will not have the stain of Bryan Singer attached to it the way that, for instance, Bohemian Rhapsody did and does. It's one thing for isolated, unproven allegations. Those still need to be investigated and proven false. But when someone has spent decades with every credible witness giving the same sort of eyewitness accounts of bad behavior, at a certain point, you've got to stop hiring this person. Or, if it's fake news, point to the real news. Do an investigation. But Bryan Singer does not appear to be the victim of fake news or anything else. He's a guy who was allowed to destroy many young, innocent lives. And what did he get for it? Well, after a ton of investigative journalism pieces, he appears to have been dropped from Red Sonja, which is a start, a step. Bridget Nielsen came out. She also, I guess, parsed through this entire article and saw the good news and made a very good point that Red Sonja ought to be directed by a woman. Now, I know a lot of people get upset when they hear, you want a person of color directing, you want it to star a member of the LGBTQ community, you want it directed by a woman. What's with identity politics? Well, the thing is, straight white men get first crack at everything. It's just the way the world works. And yet there are billions of women, billions of members of the LGBTQ community, billions of people from every walk of life, every social stratus, every nation, and all kinds of beliefs that are not necessarily Christian. And from each of these, there's a really deep talent pool. And if one wants to say, I want a woman director, that is in no way, I know people get triggered so easily, but that is not an insult to men, nor does it really limit your scope of talent in any way. If anything, it leads you to investigate people who haven't been given every single movie to direct for 20, 30 plus years. Gives you the opportunity to discover tomorrow's stars today. So while I don't agree with everything Bridget Nielsen says and does, I'd certainly, look, any director other than Bryan Singer is a victory, but I think she's onto something. I think a woman director for this historic warrior woman and her titular movie, it makes absolutely perfect sense that you get a great woman director, preferably someone brand new who you're discovering. Because first of all, it's always great to do that. It's very hard for talented young people to break into this business. And second of all, it's a reboot. It's a very old property that even the movie is now like 30 years old. And what better way to modernize it, dust it off, and really present it as something new than to feature the debut of a really talented female director. So I'm with Bridget on this one, 100%. Lastly, before I go, just thought I'd give you some news about stuff that's coming to Netflix. Part 2 of various shows that you may have forgotten had Part 2s coming out. In particular, this one, I can't believe I'm saying this, but I don't care. I'm going to watch, because these are probably going to be the last episodes of this show to ever be produced, but I'm not looking forward to it in any way. And that alone is shocking. I am an OG, old school, diehard fan of Arrested Development. I watched the original and remixed versions of season 4 on Netflix, and I watched the 8-episode first half of season 5 that debuted late summer of 2018. I could barely handle those 8 episodes. They were so terrible. It's like they weren't even trying. The fact that they rolled out alongside this ugly news of Jeffrey Tambor behaving like a monster on set, reducing Jessica Walter to tears. Then during an interview with the New York Times, the cast gets asked about it, and all the guys jump in to defend Tambor, leading a very diplomatic, trying to be anyway, Jessica Walter, to eventually try and describe what really went down in as forgiving and broad and gentle tones as possible before she breaks down in tears again, just remembering it all. It's really upsetting, and a million times more memorable than any of these bullshit 8 episodes that made up part 1 of season 5 of Arrested Development. So now it's nearly a year later. I don't know what took so long. I know that Mitch Hurwitz, the creator of the show, and apparently a very important presence on set, had basically checked out, had some kind of breakdown or something, and I mean, the actors were basically begging for him to appear on set. And at some point, David Cross and some others staged like an intervention and said, we can't continue doing this show without you. Come on, come to the set. But sadly, I'm with Hurwitz. This is not something I want to see or take part in, and I think it's embarrassing. We're talking about one of the best TV shows, most funny and original of all time. One of the greatest ensemble casts still, but the magic is gone. And in a way, that's more depressing than this sort of nebulous idea of, oh, maybe my favorite show will come back. It's much more depressing when it comes back and has such dramatically diminishing returns. But having said that, you can watch the remainder of Season 5 this Friday, March 15th, and I'll be doing that. I may or may not review it because I think it's going to be extremely anticlimactic, probably very painful to sit through. But if I do find I've got something nice or something horrifically awful to say about it, then I probably will. If it's just middling, barely watchable, bad TV, which is what it looks like and what I'm expecting, I may or may not remark on it at all. Now, in news that I am excited about regarding Part 2 of Netflix shows, Part 2 of The Chilling Adventures of Sabrina. There's a new poster out for it today. I will attach a link to it in the description for tonight's podcast. It's a picture of the lovely Sabrina, flanked by her love interests, Harvey Kinkle and Nicholas Scratch. And she's holding up a book that does not look like a Trapper Keeper. This, to me, looks like Necronomicon Ex Mortis, the Book of the Dead, which, after all, is much more appropriate for Sabrina anyway. So new episodes of The Chilling Adventures of Sabrina hit Netflix on April 5th, and I am considerably more excited for that than I am anything to do with Arrested Development, which is a shame. And as always, when I've got negative stuff to say, I invite you. In this case, the you is Mitch Hurwitz, the cast and crew of Arrested Development and Netflix. I'm begging you, prove me wrong, make me love you again. And if you do that, please uncancel yourself, because Netflix has as much as said there's not going to be a season 6. And barring any huge change, a massive uptick in quality, I don't think that there should be a season 6. I think at this point it's degrading the franchise's good name and that of its cast. Not the least of which being that of Jason Bateman, who, after all, is on a wildly successful Netflix series, a really engaging and brilliant one that's only getting better, and on which he's putting in the performance of his life. Talking, of course, about Ozark. So I hope you're having a great week. It's halfway over, so even if it's going badly, hold on. We're at the midway point. So why not get in touch with the Matt Sager podcast? You can email me, matt@mattsager.com, or call 646-535-4788. You can also get me on social media. On Twitter, I'm at Matt Sager. Instagram, I'm Real Matt Sager. And on Facebook, let's see. My personal page is The Matt Sager. My voiceover page is Matt Sager VO. And this podcast's page, which I'm inviting you to check out and join and like. It's facebook.com/Matt Sager Podcast. Also in the links to tonight's podcast description, check out the links to my Patreon. It's patreon.com/Matt Sager. And my merch store from my good friends at WeHaveMerch.com. I am currently wearing a Matt Sager Podcast t-shirt, and they look great, as do the Matt Sager Podcast hoodies, coffee mugs, and stickers. For everything else, my voiceover reels and contact information, articles I've written, and blog posts, even back episodes of this very podcast, you can find all that and more at my website, mattsagervoiceover.com.